Hi, welcome to StatStuff. I'm Matt Hansen. This lesson is part of an extended discussion on identifying potential root causes for eventually building a data collection plan, or DCP. In this lesson, I'll specifically be reviewing the cause and effect diagram, or C&E diagram, and how that can be used for building the DCP. So it's essential that you at least review the previous lesson that I've talked about in introducing the DCP. But for now, let's quickly review how the C&E diagram fits into this discussion on identifying the root causes.
Remember, what we're trying to do here is to build the transfer function. That's the y equals f of x. In order to do that, we have to begin with trying to build the data collection plan, or the DCP. So we should already know what the project y is. So now we need to find out what are those potential x's for that transfer function. And it's the data collection plan that's going to help us ensure that we have enough data for measuring that y and every one of those x's within the transfer function. So what we're going to review again is the overall method for how we might build the DCP. And started off with, as an input to our meeting with the team, it's going to begin with making sure we have the defined phase items, which would also include the y and the defect definitions. All those things that we should have up to this point, make sure we have those already defined before the meeting even begins. And then for the meeting itself, the process that will actually follow during the meeting is going to begin with this next step, which is validating the y and the defect definition with the team to make sure they agree with it. And next we want to identify what are all the potential x's that the team believes are the x's that could be part of the transfer function. Well, we might use several tools again, like the cause and effect diagram, which is also the fishbone and Ishikawa diagram, and also the 5 whys tool. Once we've identified the potential x's, then we move on to the next step, which was narrowing down those potential x's to what we consider to be the most critical x's. This is where we might use the cause and effect matrix, or the C&E matrix, to figure that out. Then the last part here is an output from the meeting. What we're going to do is our last step is to build the data collection plan, that DCP, for those critical x's we identified. And this is where we're going to use something like the sample size calculator, as well as consideration for the short and long-term data and the data collection plan, in order to build this final data collection plan from this process.
Okay, now let's define and illustrate what the C&E diagram is.
Well, the cause and effect diagram, or the C&E diagram, is a collaborative tool that's also known as the fishbone diagram or Ishikawa diagram, but it's that collaborative tool that we use with the team to help identify all the potential causes that lead to a particular undesirable effect or some sort of symptom that you're trying to solve. So what's the purpose behind the C&E diagram? Well, it helps the team to focus on the problem's content and not on the history behind the situation. As well, it keeps the team focused on the problem's causes and not on the other symptoms. And also, it uses the team's collective knowledge to build a holistic view and create the team consensus of all the different possible causes that could be affecting the overall symptom or problem that you're trying to solve. So just to give you an illustration of what it looks like, here's what a C&E diagram looks like if you build it in Minitab. But there are a lot of other resources that could be used for building a C&E diagram, but this is just one particular one I'll review, and if you wanted to build it within Minitab itself. But it looks, as you can see, like a fishbone, the way it's laid out with these lines, where the center line here is pointing to the overall undesirable effect or symptom that's causing the reason for you to even meet to find the root cause for this in the first place. So you identify what that is, and basically each of these bones feeding off of the C&E diagram point to as possible root causes for causing that undesirable effect. Each of these bones in this particular example are using what's called the 6 M's. These are 6 different possible sources of variation, like Mother Nature, methods, manpower, materials, measurements, and machines. There are other versions that you can use. You may not need all of these, but this example just shows these 6 M's as possible things that you can talk through with your team that could be areas of discussion for finding potential root causes. Once you identify those potential root causes, those are all labeled out here, and you might get even more complex in having multiple layers in building this tool. But the point is that you're getting down deep into what are the potential root causes that all lead up to that overall undesirable effect.
Now let's talk about how you can build a C&E diagram.
Well, building the C&E diagram starts with gathering the team so you can build it all together. Now, this should be a collaborative tool, something you build together as an entire team. It should not be something that just one person creates as a vacuum on their own. When you build a diagram with a team, you might want to use like a dry erase board or a flip chart where you're using some post-it notes. So as an example, you can just get this on the board where you can talk through it with the team, and there are lots of different tools that you can use for actually building the diagram, like you do it within Minitab or Excel or Visio or many other tools like that. However, when you're working with a team, sometimes it could be effective in just trying to build it together manually, like using post-it notes, rather than using software. And you can always convert it then from what you've manually created, like using post-it notes, and document it within software later on. So we might start off with something like this, where we have the dry erase board, where we have this surface prepared for documenting the C&E diagram. Then the first thing we want to do is define the effect. Document that main spine within the fishbone diagram. This will most likely be the defects that were defined, like the symptoms that were somehow tied within the problem statement. Now, if you have multiple defects that are defined, then you might want to create a separate C&E diagram for those. So you might have multiple C&E diagrams, one for each of those different symptoms or defects that you're trying to document the root causes for. Next thing you want to do is draw and label the diagram's bones, those parts that are going off of the spine. So here's an example of some of those that you can use. It doesn't have to be these, but this might be a good starting point if you didn't have anywhere else to start. For example, you can identify manpower as one of those primary bones or a source of variation coming off of that. These could include things like personnel issues, like turnover or training that could lead to that symptom. And the next one could be machine. This is related to like issues like equipment or hardware, software types of things that could create that undesirable effect. Another bone off of that could be methods, like issues related to policies or procedures or process steps or regulations, those kinds of things that might lead to that undesirable effect. Next could be measurements. These are issues that could be how things are measured, like standards or performance goals or targets or those sorts of things. Materials might be another bone. These are like things related to documentations or different types of forms. And then another one could be Mother Nature, issues that are related to outside influences, things like the economy, or issues that are affecting customers or vendors. All these labels can be modified, but you should limit it to about only 4 to 6 unique labels. The labels are what help us to categorize the possible causes, so it's important that these are unique and that they're relevant to whatever that unidentified effect is that you're trying to relate everything back to. Then we might want to do is brainstorm the potential causes for each of those different bone categories. That is where you're writing each of those things on a post-it note one at a time, where you're taking one of those different bones and you're talking through what those potential root causes are for leading to that undesirable effect. And then you might document them and start jotting them down with the post-it notes, and as you do, just continue to talk through these different things that you're finding and label them. You can move them around if they're on post-it notes, and it's okay to do that. The main thing is you want to identify as many as possible. And then you might want to identify from each of those some sub-causes that could be drilling into more deeply some additional opportunities or potential factors that you might find, like why does this happen? You might go a little deeper and find extensions off of those bones and let the discussion go in that direction if it looks like you might find some additional, more deeper root causes to identify.
Alright, now let's talk about how you may go about documenting the C&E diagram in an online format.
Well, for documenting the C&E diagram, there are several ways you can do that. First, after we've already built the C&E diagram manually with the team, then we should try to document it if possible in some sort of software tools that are available. By doing that, it gives us a better illustration in the project storyboard. It gets us something more legible and something that works well within a project storyboard when we're presenting our project and when we're going to explain how we identified these potential root causes in the first place. So what I want to show is how you can build this type of C&E diagram within Minitab as one of the possible software packages that you can use to build this type of diagram. So you begin by going to the worksheet within Minitab and typing in each column the different causes that were identified within each of the bones of the C&E diagram. And then you would open a Minitab, you go to Stat, Quality Tools, and then Cause and Effect, and it'll open up this dialog box for you to look at here. So then what you do is you would update the label section to reflect the bone labels that are used in the diagram. So over here on the right hand side, if you have 6 different ones like the examples that I was showing in the previous slides, you can identify all 6 of those. And then next you would want to, for the causes section, assign those column titles. Like if I had the causes written out across these 5 different columns, you would assign what those causes were to each of these labels, to their respective one. So if you have sub-causes, then what you want to do is change the in-column drop-down that's over here to constant, so that you reflect the name of the new bone extension that you're going to use. Then you would click on the sub button and assign the column title respective to that newly created label. Now, after doing that, you would type in the effect, whatever that effect is that you've identified as the undesirable effect that was going to point to that thing on the right hand side that all these causes are leading to. And then finally, you could add a new title if you want. Otherwise, if you don't add your own title, then Minitab will create its own title of cause and effect diagram.
All right, before we close this lesson, let's discuss how we can apply some of these concepts in a practical way.
We may not have an opportunity to use a new C&E diagram right now, but what I would like you to do is try to identify a prior project that you might have worked with in your organization, and you can try to build one using that. So let's try to build, using that prior project, a C&E diagram for that project and try to answer some of these questions. For example, what was used as the critical metric or that project Y for that particular project or initiative? And how would you define a defect in that project? This might be that ultimate effect, that undesirable effect that you would use within the C&E diagram. And next, try to review each source of variation that we have listed below and notate any of those related causes leading to that effect. Again, that would be related to the manpower, machine, method, measurement, materials, and Mother Nature. What are those potential causes according to each of those different sources of variation that could lead to that undesirable effect? And then notate any additional subcauses that could also eventually lead to that ultimate undesirable effect. And then try, after you've identified that, try to build the C&E diagram in some online tool like Minitab, Visio, or PowerPoint, or whatever software tool you're comfortable using in illustrating the C&E diagram.
Well, that wraps up this lesson. Check out StatStuff.com for many more resources that can help you achieve powerful results. I'm Matt Hanson. Thanks for watching.